Hi, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. We are going to be starting in just a few minutes. Some people are logging in right now, so we're giving everyone a chance to go ahead and log in, but we'll be starting in just about 2 minutes.
So we will be recording this webinar. We're here at the National Academy of Sciences in Washington, D.C. With the webinar number 4 of the program to BIM. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. We have people assembled in the room and online, and we'll be going through introductions here. This is hosted by the Federal Facility Council at the National Academy of Sciences, Asset Leadership Network, and we have members of the Building Smart Alliance here as well, too. We're calling this a Science in the Eye of BIM. We're focusing on the information and the data today. This is Kimon Onuma from Onuma Inc., Thought Leadership Chair of Building Smart Alliance, and we're going to be talking about Program to BIM today. We have support from the Asset Leadership Network and the Building Smart Alliance Thought Leadership, and these webinars are put together and sponsored by Onuma Inc. So Jim Dieter is here with us today from the Asset Leadership Network. Jim, welcome. Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you for having me. My short version of how to describe the involvement of the Asset Leadership Network is around the people, money, and stuff that every organization needs those to be successful. And we have spent a lot of time talking about people and talking about money. And now is the time where the value that can be derived from stuff and the better management of that stuff, those assets of various types and many types, can really make a difference for organizations. So our Asset Leadership Network is really excited to be involved with Kimon and his efforts and the others involved here and the Federal Facilities Council. So appreciate the opportunity today.
Thanks, Jim, and thanks to the Asset Leadership Network and for the awards that you presented to these projects. And it's obviously a group of people and owners of organizations in the National Institute of Building Sciences that have been involved with it, Building Smart Alliance. And Cameron Osvik from the Federal Facilities Council. Cameron, would you like to say hello? Yours?
Yeah, thank you. Hello. The Federal Facilities Council is happy to host this concluding webinar today and see that the technologies and processes that are being discussed today, we see them as an integral part of asset management and an integral part of facilities management, which is what the Federal Facilities Council has a particular interest in. For those that don't know, the Federal Facilities Council is an organization comprised of over 24 federal agencies who define a program of study that is conducted here at the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine every year. And we're happy to have some of our members in the audience today.
Thank you very much, and thank you for hosting us in this great space with all the technology we have around us with speakers and microphones, and we have a great group assembled here at the Keck Center, and we have a lot of people online. And just to outline a little bit of the structure of the webinar today, this is the 4th in a series of webinars. We've been having them once a week. This is the concluding webinar. So we have people online that we're addressing, and the 4th one was geared towards the technology that's driving all this. So we started with an owner's view, then the AEC industry, then manufacturers and products, and now we're looking at it from the technology side. And it's all looking at the same type of challenge that we have. How do we connect the dots together? So the first 1 hour, we're going to be focusing on the webinar and people online. And the second 90 minutes, we're going to turn it over to the speakers here and the attendees here in the room, and we'll have a discussion, and those that are online can continue to follow along with us. So that's how we'll structure today. For those online, there's a question box on GoToWebinar. You can chat your questions, and we'll be assembling them. And Mike Bordenaro is here from the Thought Leadership and from Asset Leadership Network, and he's going to be helping us facilitate the question and answer session. Okay, so let's move along here. So Mark Sands from the Thought Leadership of the Building Smart Alliance just posted this blog a few days ago, and we had this discussion over the last few weeks about data and BIM, and we started talking about, he brought up Moneyball, and he said if we look at Moneyball, the type of data and the analysis, basically looking at the data that we have in front of us and being able to make informed decisions that were not available before. In other words, information is there, but if we can't process it, then we can't make those decisions. And that's what Moneyball basically changed, how baseball is managed and decisions in baseball and strategy. And we said, okay, let's play around with that. What if we bring BIM, and we call it BIM ball. We're kind of having a fun summer here and calling it a BIM ball of 2016. And what if we bring that concept into the building industry, and what can we do with that? So I'll just start talking through it, and I'll bring the slides back up as we start up. But Moneyball started thinking about data and BIM and how can we keep it simple. And we started thinking about the minimum, we call it minimum viable BIM. This came up in the last few weeks. What's the minimum amount of data that we can use to make decisions that will have the largest impact? And it fit right in with the theme of this whole series of webinars where we looked at these projects at the National Institute of Building Sciences. And Renee Tejan from VA was going to be with us today, but she has a cold. And so Deke Smith was supposed to be with us today, and he has a cold as well, too. But Renee talks about how data and information for the VA has a huge impact on how they manage and make decisions about facilities. And so that's what we're going to show today, is how that information that an owner manages can be used in a way that has huge impact on the life cycle of facilities. So the very beginning point of making a decision about managing the requirements for a facility trigger a series of events that information can make its way all the way through the design and construction of facilities and into operations. And obviously with the Building Smart Alliance and COBE and Bill Brote, I see you're here, one of the fathers of COBE here. So welcome here. If we think in terms of a simple way to manage information, there's a lot that can be done. This next slide, we're actually going to be doing a live interactive session with the audience online and if you're in the room too as well. We're trying to prove the point that this data that's coming from the early stages of design can make its way all the way through design and construction into operations. We have this very simple mobile interface that's going to actually be interacting live with a server with the data in this model that started from the VA Space and Equipment Planning System requirements. And this building actually is landed right next door here at the Keck Center. We made a really quick simulation of building a clinic. So you can actually see and we'll walk through this later on about how to actually work with this and the work order system. Last week, we actually started talking also about BIM Babel. There's a lot of discussion, great work that's been done out there, and we all rely on these standards and tools that are out there, but there's so many different formats, and there's a lot of confusion still out in the industry of what do we do with all this flood of data that's coming out of BIM in different formats, BIM and non-BIM data, and we tag that as a BIM Babel. So conceptually, we're saying there's the Moneyball, there's BIM Babel, and today we're talking about the science of BIM and the data that we can do with it, what we can do with it. So we heard from the owners in the first session that they want to start now. They know that there's a lot of work to be done with standards development, but there's also an immediate need to do something with the data that's available today for design and construction. They want to start now, not 5 years from now. They want to use standards, obviously, to have information go into any different program, so the open standards concept is very important. And they want to be able to test things quickly before they go live. So along those themes, Renee Tejan talked about the medical facility being the largest piece of medical equipment that VA owns. In other words, it's a piece of equipment, whether it's a single piece of equipment in a room and the hospital itself. But if the medical equipment is not functioning correctly, if you can't get to the information, then you can't provide the services that you need for your customers, your patients. And this was actually from the NIBS BIM Healthcare Consortium years ago. A group of owners, including VA and DOD and Sutter Health, looked at the whole design to construction to operations process and identified what were called blue dot and red dot. If you want to go into facility management and manage data, if you don't have well-structured data, it doesn't matter how many BIMs you have and how much data you have. If it's not consistent, you're going to be constantly chasing that consistency. So having consistent data going into the design and construction, the blue dot is kind of the seed that starts the process. If you have consistent naming and numbering, what's the minimum piece of information that's needed to get that information through design and construction, and that's the blue dot of the program requirements. And that's actually a very simple concept to kind of digest, and we'll go over that in a little detail here about how that's been working with the DOD and VA. A program called SEPS, the Space and Equipment Planning System, developed by SPAWAR. There was a strategic plan and prototype of how to move that into the cloud. It was moved into max.gov, and now on max.gov there are a lot of other applications that are open source and commercial off-the-shelf and government off-the-shelf applications that are working together in the cloud, and you can plug and play different pieces of it, and this space and equipment planning system data is there now as a web service. Max.gov uses a wide range of technology stacks, and that's really the interesting thing here from a technology perspective. If you start talking to developers and software developers, there's recognizable pieces in there. You can say, hey, we can build an application that plugs into here. So if the data about the facility that's now hosted on max.gov for SEPs is accessible, the first recommendation we made is don't distribute this by CDs, because before it used to be burned on a CD and mailed worldwide to all the consultants and the agencies. Say, here are our standards. Well, in 2016, that just absolutely doesn't make sense. It's really, if you put it on, host it on the web, open up a web service, and we also identified, and by the way, this data, there's nothing secure about it because these are the standard requirements. This is not actually a hospital in Afghanistan. It's how you design a dental clinic that then gets translated into hospitals. So that tempo of requirement phase, being able to consistently share it so the AEs and the builders and the vendors can work with it, and then also the VA and DOD and other users of SEPs can use it. So we now have, after a 2-year process, getting this data online into SEPs, into web service, and it follows the White House digital strategy, basically saying if you look at applications, disconnect the data from the front end, the interface, create a platform, and use the same data in many different applications in the same way. And we describe this from a Lego approach. If you think in terms of Lego, if green is the data, if green is inside a black box, you have to have that application get into it, get to the data, and you have tons of these applications. It's very difficult to share information. But if you take the data out of a black box, put it into what's called a data service, then you have an open data, a database with a data service. Basically, the data service is the traffic cop that says who can get to it. Then you can start plugging applications along the top as Legos. Applications that are off the shelf or new applications that don't even exist today. And that's the world that we all live in. And today's session is really speaking to the vendors and the application developers out there and saying, hey, look, now we have this data here. What can you do with it? What kind of value can you bring back to these owners that want to manage this information? And that's what SEPs is about. So we use this exact same strategy. The White House didn't invent this. This is basically how the web runs today, the cloud and data services and platforms. So we took the data that used to be distributed by CDs, put them into the green boxes, opened up the public web service, created the blue layer on top that says who can get to it, and then the SEPs application itself that was developed by SPAWAR is using that data. So SPAWAR itself is using it. Then we layered in a piece on top of it to use BIM and to connect BIM into that. And that helps the VA, obviously. The faster you can process this data to get the requirements across, the faster you can actually keep things consistent. And the most exciting thing in the last year or 6 months, we've had a lot of vendors very interested in this now. Because if an owner declares, here's our data, then the vendors say, well, we can do things with that. We can align our libraries, our object libraries. We can align our databases about medical equipment. We can use our like BIM object or 3D warehouse. SketchUp has objects online. If they have the same IDs with their objects, all of a sudden these things are in sync, and it doesn't matter what application you're using, and you can plug into that. So the key questions from a data perspective, this is big data. There's a ton of data in it, and how can we connect that to big BIM? And what's the difference between electronic documents, file exchanges, and data exchanges? So even though you have a cloud or a place on the web, a server, to put data or BIMs or databases on, if you can't get to the actual specific piece of data with that exchange versus downloading the entire file and getting from it, it's not a file exchange, it's more of a data exchange. How do you make those rules to work with that? And are we waiting for the perfect IFC? Obviously, IFC and the Building Information Modeling Standards are all part of what we do, but there's also this whole other world of data services and the cloud that are kind of coming together. It's not one or the other, it's both. And what's the minimum viable BIM? Okay, so let's move along here. So today we had this playbook that we put together that basically put these 9 points. If you start doing this as an owner, we said if you inventory your data, create just find where the data is first, create a list, share that data somewhere, host it somewhere, which is what happened with SEPs, mandate the use of it internally and externally with your consultants and vendors, and then start building applications on top of that. And today we're kind of focusing on number 7, 8, and 9. What can you do with that data once you have it there? And what Jim mentioned in the beginning, the finding stuff problem, even if it's a PDF or a digital file, if you can't get to that bit of information, it makes it very difficult to manage. So we're all heading towards wanting to be in the cloud, wanting to be able to use mobile devices. And if we start with a minimum viable BIM, it actually is achievable right away. There's no reason to make it overly complex. You can get a huge head start by keeping it simple and accessible to many people and being able to broadcast this information out. Okay, so I'm going to skip over a few of these here and just jump to this. Sorry, these slides for some reason were crashing the screen, so I'm just using the navigator here. So this data about SEPs is very simple. It's basically what type of rooms do you have, what do you call them, what's their ID, how big are they, and a few other attributes. Not very many, just 9 or 10 attributes. The same thing with equipment. What equipment do you need in this room? How big is it? Does it have an electrical requirement? What's the ID of it? And SEPs had that in their database. So then when we hosted this, then you can actually get to it through the web. So I'll do a quick demo. I'm skipping over some of this pretty quickly because we showed this in the last few weeks. We want to quickly get to the more detailed kind of a technology discussion about it, but I'll do this demo again because it's actually pretty interesting to see that it's actually live. Anybody can try this if you go to seps2bim.org. And from a technical perspective, there's what are called web services here. If I click on this web service, this is actually live data on the max.gov server of DoD and VA standards. All their spaces, all their standards, all of their equipment. Without a login, you can go and say, pull it down. What are your standards for all your spaces? Tons and tons of data. So if we pull any of these are a web service, which means we can point developers to this and say, here's a web service. If you link into this, you can create applications on top of that. And that's why these vendors were able to quickly build applications on top of this. But we'll go into this sample here of building a single room. So in the past, if you have a bunch of BIMs, of here is a typical MRI or dental exam room, whatever, and you park it on the web as a BIM template, if something changes in the standards, you have to go out and manually update those templates, which is not scalable because you can have thousands and thousands of these, and the standards of medical planning are constantly changing, even if it's a simple room. What's happening here is basically that if I call up this room, I'm going to call it the dental exam room, and I hit proceed on this, it's going to the server, to the max.gov server, grabbing the standards, going to another BIM server, which in this case happens to be ours, but it could be another BIM server plugged into it, that has the geometric location of these objects, and assembling the room in real time with the data that's current. It's fresh data that just came off of the requirement right now. So if we go and look at a sample output here, I could go and get my email and show it live as well too, but this is interesting because this is one I saved over a year ago. We put a freshness date on it. In other words, there's an expiration date. If I go and look at this, when it's 422 days old, it's going to be that standard from 422 days ago. But the one that I just requested, within a minute, it goes and grabs the latest data and builds up that room. So all of these are built dynamically from the web, because the web service is available from the government, from the SEPs servers and the max.gov servers. Then these can be built on the fly. And because it's built on the fly and it's structured consistently, it's actually a COBie file even from the very beginning. I can actually create a COBie file or a Revit or a SketchUp directly from this right here. So it's dynamically generated, and this can happen for a whole hospital. So there's the file. I'm not going to show that live. We'll be jumping into a little bit more later on. So that's the utility that we just showed right here. It's building stuff on the fly. It's available to anybody because this is not a real project yet. These are the standards. You can use these standards and start assembling them. Or you can actually get actual project data with a login and actually build up a whole 500,000 square foot hospital, which we have been going through several exercises with different AEC companies. AECOM actually demonstrated this a few weeks ago. So that structure that I just described, the equipment and the spaces are available in that server. The web service is available, as I pointed out earlier, the RESTful web service, to get to the equipment and space standards, and therefore vendors can link into that and build applications, and they would have the exact same data whether you're opening it up in SketchUp or Revit or ArchiCAD ONUMA or BIM object. It's basically sharing that information. So the private industry vendors that have linked in already, and this happened pretty quickly. This is the interesting thing is a lot of these are obviously BIM vendors, but there's one vendor here called Atania that is not a BIM application, but they have a lot of data that would be very useful to BIM. They were able to link into this within a few short, the prototype for it was done in a few short weeks. We basically pointed them to the web service. They built their application on top of that, and now medical equipment data is coming from Atania all the way, and we'll show this live and the technical part of this later as well too. And the same thing with SketchUp Trimble. I don't know if Cindy's online or not, but yeah. So if Cindy Hoagland from Trimble is online, I'll have her say a few words, but I'll do an intro here. So we had all these objects, what I showed earlier in that utility. We had a Revit family that was built by the Corps of Engineers and was updated and adjusted to this new SEPs to BIM process. And then Trimble said, hey, we can convert these objects into 3D warehouse, which they did, about 800 objects into 3D warehouse, using the exact same IDs, so they were in alignment now with the Revit objects. Once they were on 3D warehouse, we open sourced a plugin that we had for SketchUp, and the Trimble team actually went and updated this plugin to work with the 3D warehouse. So when you open it up in SketchUp now, it actually goes and grabs the right object. So the designer doesn't have to say, well, I don't need to find 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, 6, 7, 8 and drag them in. It actually goes and live as you push that utility through here. So these are multiple vendors' tools starting to talk to each other and automatically generate a BIM, in this case SketchUp, that aligns with Revit. This is huge because it saves a ton of time of being consistent and having a 3D view of it, using whatever tool you are comfortable with, and going to that. So Cindy's not online. She's on vacation somewhere, so it's hard a little bit to reach. But, yeah, so Trimble, many of you have heard that Trimble and Autodesk have announced an alignment of their strategy and standards. You're starting to hear more of this out in the industry of different vendors wanting to make it easier, obviously, for their customers to use their tools. And it's pretty amazing that Trimble and Autodesk made this announcement. They're going to be working more in alignment with each other. And I think there's going to be more coming out soon about that. But anyway, this happened pretty quickly. Once we open sourced the plugin, they updated it within a few weeks. A few weeks later, we had a working prototype. So it was a collaboration between different tools. And it was triggered because the data from VA and DoD, from SEPs and SPAWAR and Max.gov was made accessible. So we showed the web service, that's the SEPs to BIM web service. We also have a web service that you can actually access the model itself. So on our side, we have our own system called the ONUMA system. It actually is using the same web service and our graphical interface, and then we have a web service going out so another vendor or another consultant can actually use that in their application. It's basically opening this up to start plugging and playing these Legos with each other. And here's kind of the sequence of events that happened. So SEPs from the government started, they opened up their data, this red line. We said, don't distribute it by CDs to everybody. Put it on the web. Put it on the web, equipment data. Very simple first, a very flat structure. 2,000 pieces of equipment with a ton of attributes. The same thing with your master tables about how spaces are organized. Then the other vendor, then build your own application. So you put it on the web first, then you build your application on that platform. So this is the same tools are using the same data. Then the other tools, like the utility I just showed you, can be built on that. And then other applications, like the Atania I just mentioned, can be built on top of that. And they're all using that consistent data. So there's no need to exchange data between applications. If you don't go, you can still do that. It's not that you can't, but you're sharing that same source data, so you're all talking about the same information. This is a huge shift from having to say, okay, I'm going to pass this data from here to here to here to here to here. And even if you're using IFC or COBE, you're hopping over the fence to get it from one tool to the next, which is a good first step. But in this scenario here of having a platform and broadcasting out, it takes all of that fuss of keeping things consistent away. It's still a minimum viable BIM, but it has huge impact. Yeah, okay. Oh, so this trajectory here, this started hopping pretty quickly. Once we saw one vendor come in and say, hey, we can do this, the next one came in. It creates a very interesting dynamic and value of having vendors and consultants align with your data. And the latest one that we talked to was just presented for the first time 2 weeks ago with Fox Blocks. This last week, actually, yeah. So as They presented last week. Then we said, hey, you have an interesting product. Their product is styrofoam, what's the exact term? Insulated concrete forms. Okay, so they have an interesting product. It doesn't have anything to do with equipment in the hospital, but has to do with the wall that surrounds the building as you start building it. So the earlier they can get in and say, we see you have this footprint, here's the type of product that we have that can fit around it. Then we said, okay, how do you do that right now? And they said, well, we have a place on the web that you can actually go and configure what your building is about. And so how you do that? Well, you put the dimensions of the walls, you write down how many corners you have, and you say how high is that wall. That's all that's needed for them to trigger the first version of an estimate, right? It's not the full BIM. It's what's the perimeter, what's the height, and a few other. The more information you put in, the more accurate it gets. So we said, okay, if we have this clinic that we're building, which is the one that's sitting outside here, the Keck Center, and we can, if you're on the web here, and if you open up a web service, and we have a web service here, all of a sudden, as we're configuring things, these two pieces of data can talk, and it's a very small set of data, very, very small. If that could trigger here, can we get a report back of that cost? We haven't actually built that, but we built that concept from last week. We said, here's how we would actually build that out. Here's a web service. If we point you to it, can you do it? So that's where we are right now, and we think there's going to be other vendors and consultants that would become interested in this approach. Okay, so a few weeks ago we had AECOM demonstrate how they use Revit. Obviously Revit is incredibly powerful and used for design and construction. They're doing a 500,000 or 700,000 square foot hospital. They actually went through the whole process of SEPs to BIM using the VA data. They declared that they used to have to do this manually. Their previous process or their current process is they manually build libraries, go put them in Revit, go collect data from many different places, jam it into the model, output schedules, and then owners have different inconsistencies in their data coming in and out. So it's a very difficult process. Whereas with the SEPs to BIM process that they tested, you basically get that data, inject it into the model, populate all the objects with consistent data and GUIDs, and this actually has been documented and is going to be shared with different AE consultants that want to use this now for VA. So back to Atania. We're going to show a little bit more live of this, but Atania is a non-BIM application, but they have 40,000 pieces of equipment data. They saw the SEPs data coming out. They saw that it was aligned with Revit and Onuma and SketchUp and Navisworks. And they said, if we can create a web service between Atania list of equipment and BIM server list of equipment, all of a sudden equipment attributes can flow from Atania into the BIM. Hundreds of attributes are populating into the models all the way into the Revit, Navisworks, and other BIM applications. So that's what we'll show a little bit more live of that today. So this is what I showed earlier. This is the Atania data. This is a VA data up here, and this is all the Atania data attributes for one object, about a couple hundred attributes that are streaming in. The end user doesn't even have to know what Atania is, but they say, well, what's the manufacturer of that dental chair? It comes in from Atania back to the end user if they're using an iPad or a BIM application to look at that. Okay, Thomas, are you about ready to go online here?
Yes, I am.
Okay, and a few more slides. So here's what Atania looks like. No floor plan data, but a ton of data about equipment. As the medical planner is making decisions here, the IDs are lined up with a BIM. They don't have to know about BIM. The BIM people don't have to know about Atania. They're both talking about the same equipment. And so as they're making decisions, and then you open it up in the BIM application and you click on that object, it streams the Atania. It goes and hits the Atania server. Even though I'm in this other BIM app, in this case Onuma or Revit, doesn't really matter. Whoever has a web service link, then you see the Atania data streaming into the iPad application. So when I click on that object, it actually pulls it up there. And that's all a RESTful web service that's happening here. Sorry, we kind of have a mixed crowd on audience today. We have very technical people and then also owners and others that are less technical about things. So I'm kind of mixing the discussion here. But conceptually, it's basically how the web works and how we expect to pull up our mobile device and call up an Uber. It's basically how you call up an Uber. You don't have to know about the technology. You're just calling up an Uber and it's finding you on the map. It's the same concept. How can we make this as simple as possible for the end user that's making decisions? Because this technology exists today. This is not something in the future. This is what we use today for everything else. How do we bring it into facilities? So here is the, and I'm going to open this up manually because I don't want this to crash again. something happened with the, so this I'm going to just open up. Okay, so we'll go into, now I'm actually switching over to, this is a web-based building information modeling tool called the Onuma system, which we use to do a lot of the development. And the intent was not to say there's one application that does that. This was as a catalyst to say this is possible to do what's called a level 3 BIM in the UK, of having a web service live connected to data. And then those connection points, the web services, we pointed those to Atania and to Trimble and others so they could actually do the same connection. It was the prototype that actually made that happen. So this is live on the web now, and a BIM on the web, basically, of a space. And if I say, okay, I'm putting my architect or medical planner hat on, and I want to look at the color coding here that says which one of these pieces of equipment actually have Atania data in it. So it's going and grabbing, and you'll notice that they're all blue here. There's one that's red here. Red means nobody has specified this piece of equipment. The medical planner that's working in Atania has not specified it, but everything else has been specified. So when I open this lamp up and say, what is this lamp about? The first thing that streams in is it goes and hits the max.gov server and it pulls in the VA DOD standards. What do they call this equipment? This is a generic requirement of a lamp. Then this is another server here. So there's three, maybe 4 servers talking to each other here live in real time. This is the Atania server. As the medical planner is specifying this equipment, I see that this piece of equipment is made by Midmark Corporation, and here's all the SKU numbers and whatever, and there's tons of data here. And you can basically call up as much as you want. We just listed it all here, but this is streaming into this BIM. So now in BIM, I'm getting data from a product manufacturer. Okay, Thomas, I think we're ready to shift over to you, if you're ready.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. So Thomas Dalbert from Onuma is actually in Hawaii. That's where he works from. And Young-Koo Kim from our office in Pasadena, California. So Thomas, go ahead.
Yes. So this is the same room that we looked at, and we, as Kimon was talking about, we talked mostly about the eye of the BIM. And so we talk about the information in here. And this flow from information, from the SEPs, this is the SEPs information that came out of SEPs, and we generated this BIM model out of that. So this here comes from SEPs. We do have all the information from SEPs in here. You have type information about this card. From SEPs, what is it, here we get this is the SEPs information that comes out of MIL Standard 691. So we got the web services getting us that information, and we also get the information, as Kimon was showing. This is the Atania. This is live actually Atania, where each in this specific room that we're looking at, the exam room, here are all the pieces of equipment that are defined in Atania, and that's the information, exact information that we're getting in live as a live web service in here. In addition to that, we can also see, if I look at that in Revit, so this is the screen from Revit. If I look at this, this is the same room again, the same clinic. If I look at the information in here, for example, for that card that we just looked at, we can get the information again here. This is web service from within Revit. It's looking at the information in Onuma, which is some of it is MIL Standard 691 information, and then we get the Atania data. So this Atania data is now streaming into Revit, so we can get that MIL Standard 691 information with web services, and we can get the Atania data with web services. All for the designer. When he works on this, he knows what the medical planner decided to work with here in this model. And this is relevant for, of course, for the planner, very much for the planner, but at the same time also for when you move forward into facility management. If you now look at this as being a built building, and we have all that information in there, and we generate work orders. That's the work order request form that Kimon was showing before. This is a system that is live connected to the model online. If you select the building here, and the first floor, and now I'm going to go again and look for that space, for that exam room. It's highlighted in the plan below, so this is streaming again in from the plan viewer, and I can now specify and say that the computer is frozen, and say that this is an IT. And I submit that work order. Now the facility manager in the background is getting this information in his work orders. Somebody, Dick, actually seems to have put in a fleet management request. So there's something with the cars that we can look at. We can look at his request. Install a sign for my parking space. So he made a request here that can be taken care of. I can assign that work order to Kimon and say, hey, Kimon, go. Go and assign that and complete that work. We call this car maintenance. And so I assign that work order now. He is getting an email that this is now assigned. But this is, of course, this goes in many directions, a work order system like this. For example, we looked at the hot water in sink is dripping in that space. This person here, this maintenance person, this technician, got an email, and he's looking now at the, let's see, I have that in Firefox. So he got an email with a link that he can click on, and it tells him that the hot water in that sink is dripping. But what I have now, because we talk about this information flow, I know in the sink that is in there, I know all the information about that sink. I know that sink is a Eagle. I know that it has a 2-year warranty in there. As a facility management person now, I have also the possible warranty information or installation information, documents linked to that. So I have every piece of information that I need to go in there and say, fix that sink, or I can go back and now I know it's still within warranty, so I'm going to get a new sink. This is the information flow that comes all the way from SEP. So basically the person who's working on this now has information that came originally all the way from MIL Standard 691 in, by the way, you saw that this automatically, the computer is frozen now, came in. So this populates automatically in the background. But this information that comes from MIL Standard 691 and from Atenia flows into facility management and can be used by the facility manager afterwards. We can even go into a plan view here and say, okay, I want to actually, this is the floor plan. And I can start color coding that floor plan and say, preventive maintenance, for example, what is coming up in the next month? Oh, these are the red pieces here that are showing up. That's preventive maintenance coming up in the next month. Or I can say these are the things that are coming up within the next 1 through 6 months, the orange ones. Or I can go in here and say, I want to see what the warranty expiration is. If I create a visual of that information, I'm not going to miss actually those warranty expiration dates. I go in here now, oh, there's some that are within the next month, so we have to go check them out and make sure that that information is actually, that they're okay. So we talk, through this, we talk all about the information that flows through the whole life cycle and can be used by the planner as well as by the facility manager.
All right. A couple of questions, Thomas.
Yep.
So what you were showing, one of the main points we're making here is that the data that originated from the owner's requirements of that piece of equipment or that space now is the exact same data that we're seeing flowing in there, and the reason that you're able to identify that equipment in the space and color code it is because we kept those GUIDs and IDs that came out of steps. And then additional data that you showed with a PDF, and I don't think you showed it, I showed Atania earlier, but there's Atania data associated with that as well, because Atania has their IDs aligned with this. At the same time, this whole model can be opened in Revit or SketchUp or ArchiCAD with the same IDs as well. This all happens within minutes. In fact, this whole exercise was put together in the last few days. We just decided on the fly, let's actually build this up and pull the data from these standards into this model, use it for demonstration. And this was the type of discussions we've had with the other vendors. If we can share how this is done, others can build the same functionality. This is not necessarily say, here's a work order system to use. It just happens to be one. It happens to be one sitting on top of that platform. It happens to be sitting on top of that green set of Lego blocks that the owner declared is what we want to use. And that's huge. And now, I guess you'll explain this part, right? The web service. So now we're getting a little more technical about that exact same building. If you're a software developer, here's the code that you can see of those decisions that we're making and moving in that building. So we open it up again.
So
go ahead and explain.
Right.
Yeah.
In here you can get all the buildings within that site. You can get all the floors. You can get a list of spaces of that building, all through web services. Those are RESTful web services. You can now even get, like if I click on this link down here, you see an XML web service. This is a web service call that calls up exactly that information. Again, we're here. This is the metadata at the front here. What are each field, and down here we see the actual information. So this is the way that it was called in SEPs. That stream that we got as a web service into Anuma, and now here we're exposing this information in Anuma as a web service again. So these web services are publicly available, and anybody can build an application on top of this. This is now Atania data. Actually, this is the Eagle. This is the information that came from Atania, and at the bottom you can get the links for those specs. So those specs that I just opened before in the work order, that's the same thing here. You get all that information through web services. Or you can use preventive maintenance and connect those pieces of information. So if you set up preventive maintenance, you can specify and link data and all that again to that.
Right. Okay. Great.
Yeah.
So the web services that we just showed, we're going to actually be opening up. We're starting up with a workshop that's called the BIM Storm, and that's where a lot of the testing of this happens. We're opening it up to other owners and others in the industry to actually start testing, building the, solutions like Atania did and the SketchUp and ArchiCAD and others did already. So this is actually live data that we're going to make accessible to others as we go through this. Okay. Anything else you want to show, Thomas? Or?
No, just you can even get the graphical interface for the web services. So this is now a web service for the graphical interface that you can build. You can actually build into Atania and into your application. Atania is actually intended to create a button in there in Atania so that you can see that within Atania, that same plan in another application.
Yeah, so there's a live plan that can be plugged into another application. That's kind of where all of these apps on the web are going. You're starting to plug and play different things regardless of what tools you're using. Okay, so let's move on, I think, right?
Yep, that's good.
Okay, great. Thanks for showing that. Okay, so we'll flip back to my screen. Okay. We left off here. And that was Thomas. I forgot to show you a picture earlier, but there you are. So this slide has been used a lot to explain this overall concept, and this is with the work with DoD and VA. If we have this common language that we're talking along the bottom here, there's a lot of different types of users in a large or even a small organization that need information. So obviously you have the design and technical teams that are using CAD and BIM and need to do stuff with it. But the CAD and BIM teams that are making a decision to call that dental exam room DNTG room 101 with that piece of equipment in it is relevant to the facility management teams. It also could be relevant to the patients in the hospital. If they want to find the radiology department, that's also a subset of that information. And the executives that want to do a roll-up. So the challenge that we see over and over again with owner organizations is, for example, executives cannot do a roll-up to say how many square feet of facilities do we have, let alone equipment do we have, let alone anything else inside the building, even though all of that data exists somewhere in a different silo. We all know that story from many, many years ago. There's nothing new about that. What is new is this approach, using the technologies that exist outside of the building industry and bringing them in, help us to solve that. It's not a very difficult thing to do. It's possible today. If we say, let's do it, then we create web services. So, for example, the patient in the hospital maybe only can see that data if they're in the hospital to find the radiology department. Maybe it's 100% public. It really depends. When you have it built up like this, you can make up rules about who are you and what type of data do you need to see. It's like logging into your account on the web. What data, who are your friends, for example. Same thing here. If you're working with a technical team, yes, they need to see the plans of the building if they're working on the project. And if you're inside the managing the facility, you need to find that facility. So thinking in terms of that granularity and serving out the data, and we don't have to crack the whole nut. I think the challenge that we've had in the building industry and BIM and even the BIM standards organizations, we overcomplicate and think of the complexity of it all and try and solve all the complexity versus starting with a minimal subset and making it work. And that was one of the biggest strengths that we saw from Kobe, for example, is that it actually focused in on made that happen, and then we can actually start doing stuff with it. So it doesn't have to be a full-blown BIM to be able to give the patient in the hospital a way to find the room, or even the technician that's looking for the air handling unit. They might not want a floor plan of the building. They just want to know air handling unit in room above room 101 or in this mechanical space. It's just a piece of data that might come on their mobile device. So it's not an all or nothing. It's how do you deliver it in a way that doesn't matter what tool you use. And that's the world that a lot of these owners that we were working with through on the NIBS projects, they want to be able to use whatever application is needed to do the job. They're tired of being stuck to applications that trap their data in their software, whether they're built by the government off the shelf. There's a lot of government off the shelf systems that do exactly that. They're essentially proprietary apps that have been built over the years that are impossible to get the data out. So if you say from the beginning we want the data to be accessible, we want to build it on a web service, we want to build small modules of functionality on top of that, it's actually already possible to do today. I'll end with a few quotes here as we wrap things up. Admiral Thad Allen from years ago said, transparency breeds self-correcting behavior. And I think it's time for that. I think we really need to open this up as owners and government agencies. This is our chance to help open the data in a way that we can interact with the vendors and the IT groups out there, because they have the solutions. There are developers out there that are doing amazing things with data. Building data is nothing. It's just like, it's a lot of data, but it's nothing compared to the big data that's happening out there and the amount of crunching that we do through the data sets that are out there. The other thing that's very important, I think, and this is from Andreas Phelps, who used to be at Balfour Beatty. He said the shelf life of a good idea is 6 months. You share it immediately or you lose the opportunity. In other words, we all tend to think, oh, we've invented the next greatest thing. We're going to hold it really tight to ourselves, and we're going to build some solution, whether we're an owner organization that's trying to build something as an owner and not wanting to collaborate, or hesitating to collaborate, maybe that's the right word, or a vendor or a consultant that says, well, I'm going to use this as a weapon to get ahead in whatever we're doing. And we can understand the business need to do that. But we've found the more, and this is why we're here actually, we think the more that we can share out, including all access to the web service even, and say, here's how we built it. Anybody else have good ideas? And others might take off with an idea that's better than what we did. That's the world we have to live in to be able to solve this complex problems. And there's a lot of people online right now from around the world that are listening in on that. And we want to find ways to collaborate and work together. That's the most important thing, and we need to start now. So don't reinvent the wheel. There's value and benefit in starting smart. Start small, work with owner data, encourage other owners to join, share resources. Don't reinvent the wheel. There's no reason to rebuild. DOD and VA agreed to collaborate on this. And this formula is not just for healthcare facilities. It works for other facility types or other assets. So maybe we'll shift over to, we started a little bit late. Yeah, take some questions from online.
Hi. This is a good time to ask this question from Poraya Parsanazad. she had not heard of SEPs before. Is this a replacement for COBie, or does it serve another function? So I'm actually going to answer this question because SEPs is the owner's information that can be put into COBie. And what we've been doing is using a government example because the government owner is public and we can talk about that. If we were a private owner, we might not want to be talking about this way of approaching facilities. But we've got this unique opportunity to use one of the biggest owners in the world as an example of how to establish web services. So then there's another question from Mr. John Elliott, who asks, as facilities constantly change, rooms do not always stay like the SEPs design. Is BIM, is Revit the choice software to update data and manage for facility operations?
That's a tricky question there. Revit is, let's take the word Revit out of here, just any BIM application has specific uses depending on what you're trying to do with it. So I think there's a lot of great things that these BIM applications can do to manage and maintain the geometry and the shape of the building and where things are. But there's also other non-BIM applications that can do the same thing. So it doesn't all have to be in a BIM application. As these applications start talking to each other, just like we showed the Atania example, there's no reason to maintain tons of Atania data inside a BIM. You can actually have a medical equipment database with the same IDs of that equipment, and the geometry is maintained as the designer is moving things around, that data streams in. So when you have this kind of an ecosystem approach, then it doesn't matter what tool you're using.
That's a very interesting answer from a software, an architect who's also a software architect. And I think it addresses the point that you're not talking about specific solutions. You're talking about the general approach to data sharing, and it does not have to be Onuma, it does not have to be Revit, it does not have to be anything. Each team has to determine themselves what tools they're comfortable with to help them solve their data sharing needs.
Exactly, yes. And going back to the COBie question, COBie is a way of transferring data from one place to the other. It's not a COBie or SEPs thing. SEPs is, it's an application, it's a database, it's a platform. COBie is a way that, COBie comes out of that, like I showed you. I can actually do a SEPs configuration and say I want to have a COBie file. Once you have that COBie file, Nick Nisbet actually just posted something great. He described it as a suitcase. It's basically a suitcase of carrying data from one application to the next. The suitcase itself is not the application. It's a container to pull it in.
It's been described more recently as a schema.
Yeah.
It's the structure for the is that on?
Yeah.
It's the structure for organizing the data, and there's a certain amount of content that it's interested in. It's not all information.
Exactly.
It's a set of information which has a lot of optional choices for the owner to make.
Right.
That was Bill Brodt, who was one of the fathers of COBie. So that was very good. Thanks. We're going to continue that discussion in person, and people from the webinar will be able to listen in, and we might even be able to get some people from the webinar to speak. But we're actually at time now.
And a couple more minutes here because we started a little late. I wanted to wrap this up. But yeah, we'll have a discussion here with the audience online and in the room. All these 4 sessions are posted online. If you signed up for the webinars or to get more information, you'll actually get access to the other recordings. We also are going to be going to present, actually we call this Hot BIM, but it's in Phoenix in a couple of weeks. It's the RTC conference, it's a name we just gave it just the other day. It's about BIM data and content. It's the same topic with a lot of different really interesting participants. I will be there presenting. And then I also encourage everybody, whoever wants to get hands-on with all of this, we're basically going to be opening up this data, having a sandbox, having all the files and examples. If you sign up with bimstorm.com/BIE for the next few months, leading into October at an Asset Leadership Network event, will be the BIM Storm for the Program to BIM effort. And Mike, thanks for taking the questions. And with that, we will stay online for those that would like to continue and participate and listen to the discussions and maybe even throw out a few more questions, if that's okay. We have people in the room here that will be here for another 90 minutes. And we'll continue that the webinar is going to keep rolling here, and thanks for those online that need to log off, but we'll keep going.
And if you're in the D.C. area and you want to join us afterwards, we're going to be going to the District Chop House on 7th Street after this, but that's only for those who are nearby.